My name is Ronald. I'm 68 years old, I'm a widower, and I've given my whole life for a family that today, he prefers the silence of my absence. Have you ever wondered what happens to a man who has always been there, but who, on the day he needed it most, was left behind as if he were a nuisance? Because that's exactly what happened to me. The day I was discharged from the hospital after heart surgery, my son and his wife told me to call a taxi. Maybe you're trying to understand how someone gets to this point. I tried it too. The truth is that when you give everything, you expect at least respect. But when you're treated like a nuisance, even after decades of sacrifice, something inside you breaks. And the worst thing wasn't their silence. It was what happened a few hours later, when they saw me on television. If you've stayed this far, it's because this story has already touched some of your wounds. And I promise, by the end, you will understand why a disappointment can become the greatest liberation of a man's life. Because it was that night that everything has changed. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know something. That night, while I was having a quiet coffee in the armchair where I used to teach my son to read, the house phone exploded with calls. 67 to be exact. All of them desperate, because for the first time, they saw me. Not indoors, not at the dinner table, not carrying bags or paying bills. They saw me on television. They saw my face, my story, and discovered that a quiet man can also speak when he decides it's time. If you understand what it's like to give everything and still be ignored, if you've ever felt that your presence has become a weight in the lives of those you created, then maybe this story is also yours. And if it is, I ask, stay with me until the end. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel. Not because I need numbers, but because telling it out loud hurts. It hurts more than any surgery. And if this video finds someone who was also left behind, maybe his pain will lessen a little. Perhaps he understands that there is still time to turn the tide. I woke up to the monotonous sound of the monitor beeping next to the bed. The sun poured in weakly through the small window of the room, tinging the cold white walls of Memorial Hospital, here in Dallas, golden. The morning shift nurse had left my coffee on a plastic tray and said with a short smile, "Today is your day, Mr. Ronald. Discharge at 11 a.m. And I smiled too. It wasn't just any smile, it was a smile full of hope. Because as much as the surgery had left me with pain even to breathe, what hurt me the most was loneliness. And in that instant, all I wanted was to go home, to my house. I picked up my phone, with fingers still shaking. I typed in the family group, the same one where I had already solved so many things in their lives. "Good morning. The hospital releases me today. Can someone come and pick me up?" I sent it and waited. I left the phone next to the bed with the screen facing up. Time passed. First an hour, then 2. The hands were moving, and so was the silence. No response, no reaction, not even a good morning. Around 10 in the morning, when the nurse came back to check my signals, I still pretended to be entertained with an old newspaper, just so it wouldn't look like I was waiting. But inside, I was counting the minutes. I tried to distract myself by looking out the window, watching the cars go by on the busy North Central Expressway below. But my mind kept coming back to the same place. Did they see the message? At 10:17 a.m., the answer arrived. Ethan, my son, my only son. He wrote, "Dad, call an Uber, I'm busy." I read and reread it about 3 times. I couldn't understand it right away. Was that it? I'm busy. No, how are you? Was everything okay? I'm passing by right away, alone. Call an Uber. I thought maybe he's at work. Maybe he can't leave right now. I tried to be fair. I always have been. I have always tried to understand both sides. But before I could convince myself that this was just a hasty answer, Melissa's came. The daughter-in-law I helped open a handmade goods store when no one else believed. The same one who one day told me that I was like a second father. She wrote, "Better stay there a little longer. The house is quiet without noise. No fuss." The cell phone slipped from my hand and fell lightly on the sheet. no fuss. That phrase beat in my chest more than the surgeon's scalpel. I was there, sewn up, sore, with my chest still marked by the tapes of the heart surgery. And they were there, celebrating the silence of my absence. What was once just a nuisance has become pain, a dry, deep pain that does not bleed, but corrodes. I stared at the ceiling for long minutes. The nurse returned, told her that the doctor had already signed the discharge. He asked me if I needed help calling someone. I smiled with my mouth, but inside something had collapsed. No, thank you. I'll solve it. Solve, as always. And here I want to pause, because maybe you on the other side understand what I felt at that moment. When someone you love, someone you helped lift off the ground, says in no uncertain terms that your presence gets in the way, something breaks inside us. Have you experienced this? Have you ever felt that your absence was more celebrated than your existence? If you've been through this, write here in the comments. It touched me, or I've lived it. Because I know. We carry this pain in silence, but it weighs twice as much when it stays only inside us. I looked at my phone again. I thought about answering. Write anything. To say that everything was fine, that I understood, but I didn't understand. Not at that moment. Instead, I got up slowly. I put on my clothes, folded my hospital gown carefully, and put it on the chair. I put my few belongings in the blue backpack that I used on all family trips. The same backpack that carried Ethan's toys on so many trips to the park. The same one who took food when Melissa still lived with us. I looked at her as if looking at an old war comrade, and I left. At the reception, I asked for a taxi. The guy who attended me was young. He didn't even seem to be old enough to understand the kind of pain I carried, but he was polite. While waiting for the car, I sat on a plastic bench. People hurried by, nurses pushed wheelchairs, visitors carried colorful balloons and flowers. I was alone. No balloons, no flowers, without anyone. The taxi arrived quickly. The driver was a gentleman with a strong accent, Cuban, I think. When he saw my expression, he asked, "Difficult day, friend." I just said, "The last 45 years are difficult, but today it hurt differently." He didn't say anything else. He just drove. And that was good, because I needed silence. But not the kind of silence that comes from indifference. He needed the silence that respects pain. As the car drove along the wide avenues of Dallas, I looked out the window and wondered, at what point did I stop being important? Was that when I got old? When did I stop paying the bills, or was it when I needed it instead of helping? And it is at this point in history that everything begins to change. Because in that car, on that journey from the hospital to my house, a decision began to form within me, silent, slow, like water that pierces a stone. Have you ever heard that a man's greatest strength is not in the voice he raises, but in the silence he chooses? Because it was there, in that taxi seat, that I chose my silence. But not a silence of surrender, a silence of preparation. Because when I got home, what I found made me understand that I could never be the same again. And what they did, inside my own house, was worse than any message. That's what I'm going to tell you about now. The whole way home, looking out the taxi window, it felt like a movie playing in reverse. Every street in Dallas had a memory. The coffee shop where I first took Ethan after he got a driver's license. The store where I bought my first furniture when I married Margie, my wife. I remember it as if it were yesterday. She laughed so hard when she saw it that I chose a beige sofa. "Ronald, it looks like a sofa in a doctor's office," she said. Life was made of these details. When the driver turned left at the corner of our street, my heart sank. Not only because of the still sensitive stitches from the surgery, but because something in me knew that, after that day, nothing would be the same. When the house came into view, the one with white siding and green windows, I felt a lump in my throat. It wasn't nostalgia. It was a strange kind of grief. As if, even before opening the door, I already knew that this place was no longer mine. I slowly climbed the 3 steps of the balcony, feeling my legs still weak. I used the usual key, but the feeling was that I was invading. The handle turned easily, and the door creaked, as if it had also aged with me. What I found inside took me off my feet. The loud sound of the television came from the living room, along with laughter and the smell of industrialized food. It was Ethan and Melissa, slumped on the couch, with soda bottles on the floor and store bags strewn across the dining table. They looked at me as if looking at an unexpected visitor. Ethan said only, "I thought I was going to stay longer in the hospital," and he turned his eyes to the screen. Melissa didn't even move. I remained silent. It was my way. I have always been a man of few words. I walked across the room, dodging the boxes of parcels that blocked my path. I went straight to my room, or what was left of it. The bed was without a sheet, and my reading chair was covered in clothes that were not mine. But it was when he saw the backpack still on his back, hanging by a thread of resistance, that everything came back. I sat down slowly and, without even taking off my shoes, I let my body fall backwards, looking at the ceiling that I painted myself with Margie more than 20 years ago. She said that the light blue gave peace, that it made the room look like the sky, and at that moment it was just what I wanted. Peace. But there was no peace in that place. Only memories, and memories, when they hurt, become ghosts. I closed my eyes, trying to rest, but the past began to visit me in waves. First was 1989, when I sold my 1972 Mustang, my childhood dream, to pay for Ethan's summer exchange. He wanted to study in England. Margie thought he should wait, but I insisted. "If we can do it now, why postpone it?" I said. I spent weeks with my heart aching to deliver that car, but when I saw Ethan's smile boarding at the airport, I thought it had been worth it. Then came 2011, when Melissa wanted to open the natural cosmetics store. The bank denied the loan. I went to my retirement and withdrew part of the fund. I didn't even check the contract. I gave in money from the heart. She hugged me and said, "You're the father I never had." But today, she can't even give me a glass of water. And how can we forget 2017? Margie was already sick, the cancer was advancing, and I did everything. I bathed, cooked, read aloud to her. Ethan rarely appeared. He was too busy, he said. Sometimes he came, stayed for half an hour, and left in a hurry. Margie died on a silent afternoon, holding my hand. Only mine. I was the one who chose the dress for the funeral. I was the one who got the photo for the coffin. I was the one who took care of everything. Ethan arrived late at the wake. Melissa didn't go. And yet, even so, I continued to help, to forgive, to try to keep the family together, because I thought that was the role of a father, of a man. But there, sitting in that messy room, with the sound of the television drowning out everything that was once sacred in that house, I began to understand that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I gave so much that I ceased to exist as a person. I became just a resource, an ATM with a name, a silent handyman. And when the resource runs out, when he gets sick, it becomes a nuisance. That was the truth that hit me like an arrow there in that bed. And you know what's worse? It was all for love. But love alone, without respect, becomes prison. And I was in prison, in my own home, in my own history. And that's when a sentence went through me like a blade. Melissa's one, on her cell phone. "The house is quiet, without noise." Am I the noise, the nuisance? What has to be removed for them to live in peace? Well, if it was silence that they wanted, I would learn to give. But it would be the kind of silence that is heard loudly, because there are silences that are screams. And it was just beginning. And if you think that what I found in that office the next day was just paperwork, get ready, because what I discovered there was the key to a change that neither they nor I ever imagined. Do you know, when a tired man stops trying to please, that's when the story started to turn. The car stopped in front of my house in the late afternoon. The sunlight beat crookedly on the porch, illuminating the dry leaves that no one had swept away in recent days. I paid for the taxi with the bills I kept in my pajama pants pocket, folded carefully. The driver, a man with a Cuban accent and good eyes, said to me, "Go ahead, sir. May everything be well." I just nodded, without the courage to answer. The gate was open. I climbed the steps carefully, holding on to the railing. My left leg hadn't fully returned yet, and every step seemed to mock my age. I turned the handle and pushed the door slowly, already feeling that what I would find inside no longer belonged to me. The room was different. The sofa Margie chose was pushed into the corner, covered with cardboard boxes. The carpet was crooked, with stains of dry food. The coffee table that once held books and cups now served as a support for packages and mail envelopes. Bags with the logo of Melissa's online store took over the floor like weeds. And in the background, the television screamed an auditorium program with laughter that did not match the environment. I smelled burnt fat mixed with sloppiness. I took 2 steps and saw Ethan. He was lying on the couch with his feet on the table. Old slipper, stained shirt, eating potatoes straight from the package. He looked at me sideways, unsurprised. He just raised his eyebrow and said, "I thought I was going to stay longer." As if I had returned early from any outing, like I hadn't just come out of chest surgery, as if my back... Bother. I stood in the middle of the room with my backpack still on my back. No one stood up. No one asked how I was. There was no hug, not even a glass of water. Melissa didn't even show up. I went upstairs without saying a word. Each step was a new weight. And when I opened the bedroom door, the last illusion fell. My space, my refuge, the room where Margie and I keep our memories, was unrecognizable. Boxes occupied the floor, piled up to the window. My photos were gone from the shelves. In their place were the store's products, cream bottles, labels, shipping papers. My office computer was turned off and dusty. The armchair, where I read at night, was now used as a coat hanger. And my clothes, pushed into the corner of the closet, as if they belonged to a temporary tenant. I sat on the edge of the bed and took a deep breath. I didn't cry. Not at that moment. I just closed my eyes. Inside, a part of me already knew that this place didn't want me there anymore, that I was just an uncomfortable presence in a scenario of convenience. I heard voices coming from the kitchen, laughs, as if nothing had happened, as if I was no longer part of that place. I wondered if Margie, wherever she was, could see all this, and if you could see, what did he feel? Maybe shame, maybe pain. But what I felt there, in that room, it was a type of death that has no burial. And that's when everything changes, because when a man feels that he has died for the one he loved the most, he can choose between disappearing or awakening. And what I did that next day when I left home very early and walked to the downtown office, it was the first step towards something that neither they nor the world expected. Do you want to know what I discovered in that office? So listen to me, because justice sometimes starts with an envelope. I climbed the stairs the next day with slow steps, and each step seemed to weigh twice as much, not because of the still recent cut on my chest, but because of what I carried inside. When I arrived upstairs, I opened the door to my old office. And there, at that moment, what was left of me was completely gone. It was supposed to be my corner, my refuge, the place where I kept my photos, my papers, my books, my silences. But everything was gone. Each souvenir was pushed to the corner, exchanged for boxes and more boxes with the labels of Melissa's store. The floor that once had a carpet was now covered with cardboard. My books, on the floor, some piled crooked, others with their cover crumpled. The computer, which I had used for years to write my memoirs and mark exams while still teaching, was disconnected, tossed in a corner like an old museum piece. And the photos, all photos, disappeared. Margie's picture frame, which always stayed on the top shelf, where she smiled that day in Galveston. No sign. I squatted down slowly, took a deep breath, and found only my chair, the only thing that seemed to remind me of me. I sat there and leaned my head against the wall. The air felt heavier in that room, like I'd been pushed into a warehouse, a forgotten corner. I didn't cry, but I also didn't breathe properly for a while. I looked at the ceiling and felt that something inside me had disappeared. And this time, I knew I wouldn't come back. Do you know when we feel that not even our own name has a place inside the house where we live? That everything you built with love became a space of convenience for others? That's right. That was it. I was erased. Not with words, but with attitudes. And that hurt more than any discussion, more than any offense, because it was a mute erasure, cold, planned. And you know what's sadder? I have always been the man who avoided conflict, the one who gave in to keep the peace, which put the happiness of others above his own. But at that moment, in that office that was no longer mine, I understood that the price of blind peace is the soul itself. And there, sitting invisible inside my own house, I thought, could it be that if I disappeared, would anyone notice? The answer hurt, and that's why something started to change in me. A strange force, which I hadn't felt in decades, began to grow. It wasn't anger, it was clarity, a cold, clean clarity like water after the storm. I got up slowly, left the office door open, and went downstairs without talking to anyone. Ethan and Melissa were in the living room, laughing at something on TV. They saw me pass. They didn't say anything. They didn't need it either. The absence of words said it all. And look, I'm here opening my heart, telling this with every piece I still have left. If you're listening to me, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel, not for me, but to show that there are people who still care, who still value a real story, because what I experienced, I don't wish it on anyone. And what did I do after that? Ah, my friend, it was just the beginning, because the next day, very early, I left the house with an envelope in my hand, and when I returned, I was no longer the same man. Want to know what was inside that envelope? So stay close, because that was the decision that turned my world upside down. In the days that followed, I became a shadow in that house. He always woke up before them, as usual. I prepared my coffee slowly in silence, with my hands still shaking, and sat alone at the end of the table. That same table where, for so many years, we sat together to eat, laugh, talk. Now even the cutlery didn't seem in the same place. The chair that belonged to Margie remained empty, as if time had stalled in it. The smell of coffee mixed with the memory of his absence. It was always the same scene. I was there with the cup cooling too quickly, while I heard the two of them snoring upstairs in no hurry to start the day. When they came down, it was too late. Ethan walked past me without even looking up from his phone. Melissa sometimes only made a nod. No good morning, no questions, no, "How are you feeling, Ronald?" The only thing that was not lacking was the loud sound of conversations and television. Sometimes they received friends for a barbecue on the balcony, and I was up there listening to the laughter go through the walls of the house I built. Last Saturday, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened as Ethan said loudly, "Beer is in the cooler, guys. Today, no one is going to drive." And they laughed. They laughed out loud. Music, voices, footsteps running in the yard. And I was there, with my heart patched by dots, listening to everything without being part of anything. No one knocked on the door. Nobody said, "Father, come down here with us." That night I had a cracker for dinner with cold milk. I didn't want to go down to fight for space in the kitchen. I didn't even have the courage anymore. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a pale man with deep, dark circles, thinning hair, and a silence so heavy that it echoed in my chest. I began to wonder, if I walked out the front door and never came back, would anyone notice? Or would they just comment, "Wow, it's so quiet here," and go on with life as if nothing had happened? Because, honestly, that's how they treated me. Like a silent weight, like an uncomfortable memory, one of those that we push to the back of the drawer and pretend doesn't exist. Not even my car, that old Ford that I kept with so much zeal, was more respected. The other day, I heard the roar of the engine and went to the window. It was Ethan, leaving with the car to take some friends to the mall. He didn't even ask me if he could. He didn't even look at me. He just took the key as if it were his, as if everything were, as if I wasn't there anymore. And maybe it wasn't, because what makes a man exist in a house is not the furniture nor the documents. It's respect. And when it's over, the rest becomes the scenario. And that's why I started writing. I took an old notebook that was hidden in the back of a drawer and started writing everything down. Every sentence, every silence, every gesture. Because I wanted to remember, not to get revenge, but not to forget who I was, of who I still was. And if you've been listening this far, know, the pain of being ignored by those we love is one of the hardest to bear. But it is also what sometimes pushes us to decisions that change everything. And that's why, that Sunday morning, I got up earlier than everyone else and put on a different outfit. I put on my best shirt, shoe polished. I took the envelope that I'd been preparing in secret, and I left through the front door without making a sound. Because now, who was going to make noise? It was my silence, and what I delivered to that address in downtown Dallas, my friend. It was the first piece of a domino that no one would be able to stop. Do you want to know what was inside? So listen to me. Because the answer will show that there are people who only learn when they feel in their skin what they ignored with their eyes. That Monday, the sun came through the window with a warm, almost timid light. I had been awake for a long time. My eyes just couldn't sleep late anymore. I got up slowly, went to the closet in the hallway where I kept some old folders, documents, letters, souvenirs. They had been there since before Margie left. I sat on the edge of the bed with the binder on my lap, opened it carefully and leafed through it, as if looking for a version of itself forgotten in time. There were bills paid from 20 years ago, Ethan's drawings at school, a birthday card from Margie with a shaky handwriting, but still full of love. And then I saw the white envelope, the will, written almost 10 years ago, signed in his own hand by me, with the firm handwriting of a man who still believed that everything was in the right place. I opened slowly, and there it was, black and white, the whole house, the car, the savings, all divided between Ethan and Melissa. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth, a mixture of regret and naivety. I carefully closed the envelope and put it in my shirt pocket. I went down the stairs in silence, as always. In the kitchen, Melissa's voice cut through the air like a knife. "Ronald, that dirty mug in the sink again. You use it and leave it here as if you had someone to clean it." I didn't answer. I went to the sink, washed the mug slowly. I heard Ethan's heavy footsteps entering the kitchen. "Dad, really?" "Try at least not to get in the way. The house is full of orders. Stay in your corner." I watched the water run through my fingers. Silent. Just listening. Just feeling. And that's when something inside me turned. It didn't hurt anymore. He didn't tighten his chest anymore. It was as if a key had turned, and instead of pain, the silence of calculation entered, of the decision. I dried myself calmly, put the mug on the colander, turned to them, and just said, "I'm going for a walk." And I walked out the front door with the will in my pocket, my shoulders erect, and a plan beginning to draw in my mind. Because it was on that day, at that exact moment, that I stopped being the clumsy old man in the house, and I went back to being the man who built all that. And if you've made it this far with me, I need to tell you something. What's next? It's what changes everything. Because there is a part of history that they didn't know. And when they found out, it was too late. Listen to me well. What I did with that envelope will show that sometimes a well-placed silence is worth 1,000 discussions. Want to know what I gave and to whom? So stay with me, because it is now that the tables start to turn. That morning, I took the bus to downtown Dallas, as I did when I was still teaching high school. I sat at the window with the envelope neatly folded in my shirt pocket and watched the city pass slowly. It was not sadness that I felt. It was something colder, clearer, a kind of calm that only comes when we stop expecting from others and start doing it for ourselves. I went down 2 blocks before the main point. I wanted to walk a little, clear my thoughts. I crossed the main street and entered an old red brick building where the office of Mr. Alan Thompson, a lawyer for traditional families in the area, operated. I already knew him from times past. He was a middle-aged man, attentive, with the look of someone who listens more than he speaks. When I entered, he recognized me immediately. "Mr. Ronald, how long? What can I help with?" I sat down slowly in the leather armchair, took the envelope out of my pocket and said in a firm voice, "I want to change my will." He looked at me with surprise, but soon understood that I was not there for light conversation. He opened a new folder, took a pen and paper, and began to write it down. I told him everything. I talked about the surgery. I spoke of my son's message. I talked about Melissa and the mug in the sink, but what else did I say? It was silence, the kind of silence that is only heard when we realize that it has become invisible to those we loved the most. "Do they still live with you?" he asked. I nodded. "And do you want to remove their names from the will?" I took a deep breath. "Not only that, I want to donate the house to a foundation, one that takes care of abandoned elderly, like me." There was a pause. He lowered his head, touched. Then he looked up and said, "Are you sure, Mr. Ronald?" Smile. For the first time in days, he smiles lightly. "I do. They erased me from their lives. So I choose who deserves to remember me." It was then that I felt inside me something reborn. I was no longer the man expecting affection. I was the man acting with dignity. "I can help forward this with legal certainty. It's a simple process if you're convinced," he said. And I was. The conviction was as firm as the concrete that I laid with my bare hands to raise that house. He then suggested, "I can indicate a serious institution. They take care of elderly people without family. Would you like to know?" Agreed. We scheduled a visit. And at that moment there in that office, it was as if I had breathed again, as if the knot in his chest had loosened. No. There are times when we understand that love doesn't always come from where we expected, but respect. This one can still be conquered, and even at the age I am, we can still start over. If you've ever felt erased inside your own home, comment here. I understand you, or it's true. Because this pain, my friend, only those who live know how it weighs. And what's next? It is the moment when the silence they wanted so much will start to hurt them too. Because while I was organizing the papers with the lawyer, something at home was about to happen. Something that neither Ethan nor Melissa could have predicted. And that's when the tables really started to turn. As I walked out of Mr. Allen's office, the air from the street hit my face as a reminder that I was still alive. I walked slowly along the sidewalk, feeling the light weight, and at the same time immense, of those papers in my pocket. It was strange. After so many years of erasement, I had the feeling that for the first time, I was writing my own story with my own hands. I crossed the crosswalk near Main Street and stopped in front of a newspaper machine. My image reflected in the glass surprised me. I seemed more upright, more awake, as if I had recovered a piece of me that I didn't even remember losing. It was then that I heard a voice behind me. "Are you okay?" I turned around and came face to face with a man holding a professional camera on his shoulder. He was about 40 years old with a serious expression, one of those who observes more than he speaks. "I'm from Channel 8, he said, pointing to the badge around his neck. "Sorry to bother. I saw you leaving the Thompson and Allen building. A lot of people come to this office when they are going through family issues. I hope everything is fine." He said that carefully, almost as if asking permission to enter a delicate terrain. I could have answered anything. I could have made it up. I could have done what I did all my life, hide. But something in me, something new, perhaps born of that accumulated pain, made me tell the truth. I'm resolving abandonment issues, I said. He frowned. Abandonment? Elderly people abandoned by their own children, people who gave everything. And today he doesn't even get a glass of water. The reporter, who until then had only been curious, suddenly became serious. You lived it? I took a deep breath. I looked at him as if looking at a stranger who, for a second, seems to have more respect than the people in the house. I lived, and I live. He took a pad out of his pocket. Can I ask you some questions? We are preparing an article on family neglect, cases of elderly people being left behind. If you want to give your testimony, we can help other people see that this happens more than they imagine. My first instinct was to refuse. I have always been discreet. I always thought that dignity was to be silent, but at that moment I realized that there is another kind of dignity, the dignity of speaking, not for revenge, but for the truth. I can count, he said, but I don't want names. I don't want to expose anyone directly. I just want to tell you what I experienced. He nodded respectfully. It's enough. He took me to a coffee shop near the corner, turned on the tape recorder while the clerk brought me hot tea. I started by talking about the hospital, from the message telling me to call an Uber, Da Melissa saying that the house was quiet without noise, from the office taken, of the silence inside my own dining table. He wrote everything down carefully. At times he stopped, looked at me, as if he needed to swallow what he was hearing. Do you intend to do something about it? He asked. I reached into my pocket where the new will was. I felt the stiff paper against the fabric of the shirt. I intend to. Do you want to reveal what it is? He smiles sideways with the calm of someone who has discovered that he no longer needs to scream to be heard. Not yet. The whole country will know, but at the right time. The reporter took a deep breath. Your story. She has something different. There's a heavy silence about her, and at the same time, a force. I looked out the window. I saw people passing by in a hurry, each with their problems, their haste, their forgetfulness. And I thought, how many others are living what I lived? How many fathers, how many mothers, how many grandparents are being treated as a burden when in fact they were the foundation of everything? I want people to know that there is a limit, I replied. A father can forgive a lot, but he can't live like a ghost. The reporter closed the block, satisfied. Let's go to the studio to record a quick call. If all goes well, his story will be in the news this week. It will reach a lot of people. When I left the coffee shop, I felt that I was taking the first step towards what would be the central point of this whole story. Because a truth told at the right time, it is like a lit match in a dark room. And when the story aired, when my voice reached thousands of homes, they there in my house would see it, heard, and they would understand. But here's the most curious point of all. That night, even before the article aired, something happened inside that house. Something that sped everything up, something that revealed more than I imagined. And that's what I need to tell you now, because what came next, it was the beginning of their downfall and the beginning of my freedom. I returned to Mr. Allen's office 2 days later, carrying with me an old briefcase where I had kept for so many years everything I thought I would leave for my son. Deeds, receipts, insurance reviews, old letters from Margaret. Funny. I always imagined this moment happening in another way. I thought that when it was time to decide the future of the house, I would be surrounded by people who loved me, people who would ask, Dad, does this have value to you? What do you want to do? But life has its own paths, and sometimes it teaches us what we didn't have the courage to say calmly. When I entered the lawyer's office, he raised his head and greeted me with that quiet respect that nowadays is worth more than any beautiful word. Ready to conclude, Mr. Ronald? He asked. I nodded. I had no doubts. Signing that document was not revenge. It was liberation. I sat down, opened the folder carefully, taking out sheet by sheet, as if dismantling an entire past. He checked organized, asked me to put on my glasses and start signing in the indicated places. I remember well the sound of the pen scratching the paper. It sounds silly, but that sound was like the end of an era. With each signature, I felt a weight coming down my shoulders. It was as if I was shedding layers of sadness that I had carried quietly for years. "Starting today," the attorney said, "the property will go to the Senior Dignity Foundation. You continue with the lifetime usufruct. After the death, it officially becomes theirs." Agreed. Senior Dignity did a beautiful job. They welcomed elderly people forgotten by their own children. They gave them a house, medicine, company. I had seen exciting reports. People who got there thinking they were going to die alone and ended up finding affection. "Do you want to keep this confidential?" he asked. I leaned back in my chair. I took a deep breath. "No." He raised his eyebrows, curious. Do you want them to know?" I folded my hands on the table. I wasn't mad. He was not hurt, only awake. "I want the world to know that a father is also tired of being forgotten. I want you to see that this happens, that there is a consequence. It is not revenge, Mr. Allen. It's true." He reflected for a moment, then agreed. "In that case, I can advise the Foundation to prepare an official statement if you wish to participate." I smiled slightly. If it can help someone think twice before abandoning a parent, so it's worth it. Before leaving, Mr. Allen put his hand on my shoulder. "You are stronger than you think, Ronald. Few would have the courage to cut the cycle." Thanked. Only those who have lived know that courage is not born in an instant. It is born slowly, from the accumulation of small pains. When I left the building, the wind was cooler than the previous days. It even seemed like Dallas breathed for me. I sat on a bench nearby, resting my hands on my knees, feeling a peace that I no longer remembered what it was like. I looked up at the sky and thought of Margaret. My wife would have understood my every decision. She always said, "Ronald, kindness is not an obligation. It's choice, and if it's not reciprocal, it is suffering." I heard, but only now did I really understand. And my friend, let me take this moment to ask you for something from the heart. I'm here opening the wounds, showing the most difficult part of my journey, because maybe this is also yours, or someone you know. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think, because when we reach a certain age, all we want is for our voice not to be erased. I got up slowly, adjusted my coat and started walking back to the bus stop. But as I followed, something inside me said that all that, the signature, the decision, the courage, was not yet the peak of the story. It was just the base, because I knew that the moment the Foundation announced my donation, someone back home would find out. And when they found out, my God, their world was going to turn upside down. The question that kept hammering in my head was, how will Ethan and Melissa react when they realize that everything they took for granted, did it simply cease to exist? The answer came faster than I imagined, and that's what I need to tell you in the next part. The interview aired on a Tuesday night at exactly 6, at that time when all of Dallas seems to stop for a few minutes. I was sitting on the couch in the living room, hands clasped together, feeling my heart pound, not with fear, but with a kind of clarity I'd never experienced. When the newspaper vignette played, I took a deep breath. Today, we are going to tell the story of a man who decided to turn abandonment into hope, said the presenter. And then, my house appeared on the screen, the same balcony where I spent so many Sundays with Margie, the same door where I expected to hear laughter, but where, in recent years, I found only silence. The reporter described my surgery, the abandonment at the hospital, the Uber I had to call alone, and finally the decision to donate the house to the Senior Dignity Foundation. My face came up soon after, in the short excerpt of the interview recorded in the studio. I spoke slowly, looking as if I were talking to someone who was listening to me closely. When you reach a certain age, you don't need luxury, needs respect. And when respect disappears, we learn to protect ourselves, even if it hurts. The reporter ended by saying that family neglect is often silent, common, and that stories like mine needed to be heard. When I realized it, my phone started vibrating non-stop. I knew they were reactions, but I didn't open any messages. Because, at that moment, one thing was clear inside me, and maybe this is true for those on the other side of the screen too. There are moments in life when the truth is no longer wounded, and it becomes liberation. And that's why I say, from the bottom of my heart, stay with me until the end, because the most intense part is yet to come. As I watched, I wondered how Ethan and Melissa were receiving it. I didn't have to wait long. Because on the other side of town, in that house that they thought would be theirs forever, they were standing in front of the television, completely motionless. The camera showed the room where I used to put the Christmas tree. He showed the hallway where Ethan played with cars as a child, and he showed the facade with my name embroidered on the mailbox. Is this the father? I'm sure Melissa whispered that, before shame took hold of her. The news continued, explaining the donation, talking about the social impact of the gesture, mentioning the importance of the foundation, and even displaying some messages from people who watched the recording and were moved. And then what I already imagined began. The audience reacted. Look, when the truth comes through the hands of life, it does not come slowly. It drags everything. Friends sharing the report with indignant phrases. Ethan's co-workers commenting on the cruelty. Neighbors on the street asking, is it true what he did to his own father? Text messages, notifications, neighborhood groups, all simmering at the same time. Some even posted old photos of me helping to tidy up the sidewalk as proof that I have always been a present man. Their phone must have become a battlefield, and that night as I turned off the television and walked to the kitchen to warm up some tea, I knew that this report was more than a story told to the public. It was a mirror that they didn't want but needed to look at. The house was quiet, and I felt a calm peace inside my chest, as if something was finally in place. But the truth is that the report was only the first earthquake. The real wave was still coming. Because when an entire town discovers what really goes on behind a family's doors, the doors can no longer remain closed. And the next morning, the doorbell of my house rang. Who was on the other side? It's something you need to see in the sequel. I woke up before the sun that morning, not because of anxiety or worry, but by the habit of an old man who learned to live in silence. The house was calm. The kind of calm that never existed as Ethan and Melissa filled the kitchen with noise, boxes, and complaints. I walked to the still dark room, pulled the curtain just enough to see the street, and right there I realized that my phone had been flashing all night. 67 missed calls. 67. I looked at the screen, left the device resting on the table, and went to prepare my coffee without haste. The kettle sizzled on the stove, and in the microwave I heated a simple roll, the kind I buy at the Mexican bakery around the corner. As I moved around the kitchen, messages came in one after the other. Dad, answer. We need to talk. You can't be on the news like that. Ronald, please call us. But I didn't touch the phone. Not because I wanted to cause pain, but because, for the first time in my life, I was taking care of myself. Silence that morning was my answer. And let me tell you, silence is not absence. Silence is presence. It is saying without speaking. It is letting the other hear the echo of one's own acts. I sat at the table with my piping hot coffee, took a slow bite of the bread, and reopened the documents the lawyer had prepared. I confirmed each signature, reread each clause. Not out of doubt, but out of satisfaction. The house now had a destination. I now had destiny. With each sip, the phone vibrated on the table like a desperate animal wanting to get attention. I just watched. The peace I felt at that moment. I didn't even feel it after the surgery, and as I stood there, looking out the window at the blue sky growing above the houses in the neighborhood, an old memory came to me like a breath. One morning, many years ago, when Margie woke up earlier than I did and left my coffee ready on the table. And at that time, just by looking at that, I knew I was loved. I stopped for a moment, and I realized that certain memories are so strong that they become shelter. Shelter for when the world decides to turn its back. And that's why I invite you now. If you on the other side also have a memory like that, the ones that warm up, that mark, that say who you are, share it in the comments. It can be something simple. I remember. I've lived it. I understand you. These memories hold us back when the rest comes crashing down. After breakfast, I put everything in place, washed the cup calmly, and went for a walk around the backyard. The dry leaves crackled beneath my feet, and I thought that deep down I was experiencing a kind of rebirth. It is not an exaggeration. Old Ronald, who accepted everything quietly, had stayed behind at the hospital door. The man who walked in that yard was another, firmer, more conscious, more self-possessed. The phone rang again. I could hear it from the window, once, twice, 3 times. Then came the audios. Ethan's voice trembling. "Dad, answer. We just want to talk. This cannot be so." Then Melissa, trying to look sweet but with nervousness escaping. "Ronald, we're worried. Please call us. You made us feel very bad with that report." Barely. They were bad. Funny that. When I was in the hospital, alone, connected to wires and machines, and I wrote to the group asking who was going to pick me up, they didn't think twice about telling me to order an Uber. But it was enough for the whole city to know, for them to remember that I existed. That's the difference between love and convenience. Love is silent presence. Convenience is desperation when appearance crumbles. When night fell, I dined on my simple plate of rice, chicken and vegetables, sat in the old armchair, and read a blue-covered book I found on the shelf. They still called, they still sent messages. I left the phone far away, almost in the other room. I slept like I hadn't slept in a long time, deep, quiet, without any weight on my chest. The silence of that night was the most powerful response of my life. But the next morning, when the doorbell rang, I already knew that they wouldn't last long without showing up. What I didn't know, it was the size of the despair they were going to bring along with them, because what happened on my doorstep completely changed the course of this story, and that's what comes now. The doorbell rang at 8 in the morning, but I had been awake for a long time. I had wiped the kitchen, packed my things, drank my coffee in silence. When I opened the door, I found them both there. Ethan, with swollen faces, red eyes, and Melissa shaking hands together, as if trying to hold back her own panic. They entered without waiting for an invitation, as they always did, as if the house was an extension of them. But this time, the energy was different. It was as if they were stepping into an unknown place. I went to the kitchen with the tranquility of someone who knows exactly what he is going to say. They came right behind me, nervous, exchanging glances. "Dad, we need to talk," Ethan said, his voice choking. Melissa added, trying to look fragile. "We didn't know you were feeling this way. I had no idea. If we knew..." I let them speak. They cried, justified, piled up excuses like someone trying to cover a hole too deep with their hands. They talked about work, the rush, the stress. They said that the cell phone was on silent, that they thought I was better, that they never imagined that I felt abandoned. I just stood there, listening to everything with the calm of a man who is tired of trying to be heard. When silence finally fell between us, I pulled up a chair, sat down slowly, and asked, "Did you call the hospital while I was hospitalized?" The silence that came after that question, that was true. Neither of them could face me. Melissa looked at her own hands. Ethan looked down at the ground. I waited because their silence said it all. And in that moment, in that very second, I understood that there was nothing I could say to make them better. What existed there were choices, their choices, and now, finally, my choices. You can have excuses for everything, I said, my voice low, firm, without a tremor. Except for that. Melissa tried to take my hand, but I withdrew slowly, without aggressiveness, just moving away. I almost died, I continued. My heart stopped. There was a moment when I didn't know if I would wake up again. And they didn't even know where I was. Ethan cried in a way that seemed to hope it would awaken something in me. But the truth is that at that point something inside me had already hardened. He said, "We're going to change, Dad. We swear." Melissa nodded, repeating, "We'll do it differently. I promise." I took a deep breath. I looked at them well. And I said the only thing that needed to be said, "You have 24 hours to find another place to live." Their faces collapsed at the same time, as if I had torn the ground from under their feet. Ethan stammered, "What do you mean?" Melissa took a step back, as if she had been pushed. "Ronald, you can't do that." "I can." I kept my tone calm. It was not a threat. It was resolution. The house now has a destination, and you must learn to live on your own. They began to talk at the same time, promise, crying, despair, confusion, but at that point nothing else penetrated me. I got up, walked to the kitchen window, and stared out at the sunny street. And I said without turning around, "You have grown up. It's time to act like adults." Silence took over the kitchen, the kind of silence that reveals much more than words. They knew. The end of that coexistence had come, and it was irreversible. Melissa was the first to leave, wiping her face in an angry way, mixed with anger and shame. Ethan stood still for a moment, as if waiting for me to change my mind. But I haven't changed, and he did. When his footsteps echoed down the hallway and the door slammed, the house was quiet again. A stillness different from that of before, a stillness that fit me. But little did I know that the way they would react after that would be even more unexpected. Because 24 hours, for those who have never learned to deal with responsibility, becomes a despair that neither of them was prepared to face. And what they did, that's what comes next. They started packing before the clock even struck 9. I heard the clatter of slamming doors, the hurried dragging of boxes, the nervous footsteps down the hallway. Melissa spoke loudly, complaining about everything, as if it was the fault of the house, the weather, the whole world, except themselves. Ethan tried to keep his cool, but his voice trembled, and every time he came down the stairs, carrying a box, you could see that his pride was crumbling with it. I stayed on the balcony, sitting in the same chair where I had watched the sunset so many times with Margie, watching that scenario, as if watching a play that already knows the ending. Some neighbors passed slowly along the sidewalk, pretending they were walking by chance. But I know that neighborhood. They were curious, of course, but there was also a kind of understanding there, almost a silent respect. No one offered help to Ethan and Melissa. Nobody. And deep down, I knew it was because the article in the news had moved everyone. They weren't just seeing an eviction, they were seeing consequences. Melissa forcefully dropped a box on the floor, looked at me on the balcony and said, "Ronald, please. We made a mistake, but what you're doing is cruel." I kept looking at the street, breathing in the warm morning air, and replied with the same calmness I've been carrying since the hospital. "Cruelty is sending an operated father to take an Uber to go home." She looked away, biting her lip. Ethan, right behind her, put the third suitcase in the car and came to me. "Dad, I don't know how to live outside of here. We have nowhere to go. I just don't understand why you can't give us one more chance." I faced him with the serenity he never saw in me. "Because it's not regret what you're feeling, Ethan. It's fear of losing comfort." He swallowed. The truth sometimes hurts more than any punishment. The day moved forward like a slow movie. Melissa complained about the heat, the mess, the heavy boxes. Ethan tried to organize the cars, fit things in the trunk, not knowing what should stay and what he had to abandon. Old movies, clothes, objects that they never took care of. Now everything seemed indispensable. It's funny, when you lose something, you start to measure the value of things. And I stood there all afternoon with my glass of iced tea, watching. They tried from time to time to strike up a conversation with me, sometimes in a sweet tone, sometimes in an angry tone, trying to make me feel guilty. But I didn't feel it. No more. I had spent too much time swallowing their abandonment, too long believing that if I gave them one more chance, maybe they would change. But life does not give guarantees. We learn, late sometimes, that loving is also knowing how to stop hurting ourselves. When the sun began to go down, their car was full of boxes, suitcases, bags, and yet it seemed too small to carry all that they had lost that day. Melissa came to me, holding a picture of the small Ethan on Margaret's lap. "Ronald, do you really want to erase us from your life like this?" I took the picture of her hand, looked at it fondly. Margie smiled at that image, and Ethan still had that innocent look that the world hadn't spoiled. I returned the photo to her and said, "I'm not erasing anyone. I'm just leaving everything in the right place." She took a deep breath, wiping away tears in anger. "You're going to regret it," she said. I shook my head. "No, I only regret letting it get this far." They closed the car doors. The engine started almost at the same time, and for a moment I saw a hesitation in Ethan's eyes, as if he expected me to call them back. But I just raised my hand and said, "Go find a place that belongs to you. Grow up." They left slowly, as if they were walking away from a dream they believed would last forever. The silence that remained afterwards enveloped me like a blanket. For the first time in many years, I was able to take a deep breath inside my own home. But little did I know that the true impact of that day would only begin to appear the next morning, when the outside world decided to react in a way that even I could not have predicted. The question I couldn't get out of my head was, what happens to those who have always lived on support? When does the support end? I would find that out soon. The house was so quiet after they left that for a moment I felt as if I heard the sound of my own heart beating, not the heart patched up by surgery, but the tired heart that for the first time in many years was resting. I closed the door slowly, as if closing a chapter that took too long to finish, and stood in the hallway breathing that still air, which suddenly seemed light. I walked around the room unhurriedly. Their mess was gone, and for the first time since Ethan and Melissa moved in, I could see the entire floor, the walls, the paintings. It was like meeting an old friend I had lost sight of. I went to my office, that space that was once my shelter, my small fortress as a retired teacher. When I opened the door, the smell of old paper greeted me like a hug. There were still some boxes from Melissa's store piled up in a corner, forgotten, occupying the place that should never have been theirs. I began to move them one by one, without anger, without haste, just returning things to the right place. I took everything that wasn't mine, put it outside, and wiped a damp cloth on the shelves, removing the layer of dust that hid years of my life. With each movement I remembered something, a test that I corrected late into the night, a photograph of Margie that had been lying there for decades, a book that I promised to reread and never reread. When I put Margie's frame back on the corner of the table, I felt a warm lump rise up my throat. It was as if she was saying, "Finally, Ronald, finally you came to your senses." I took my books back, lined up the spines carefully. I recovered my important papers. I recovered the space where I thought, where I breathed, where I was me. Then I walked into the living room, turned on the record player that had been stored for years, and put on a jazz record that Margie loved, Dave Brubeck, Take 5. The vinyl sizzled softly before it began, and this little imperfection was so beautiful, so human, so mine, that I closed my eyes and let the music take over the air. I made new coffee, extra strong as I always liked and as they kept complaining. I sat in my armchair, the same one they pushed aside to make room for the boxes, and felt the weight of the old fabric mold back into my body. The clock on the wall marked 5 minutes, then 10, then 15. I just stood there, breathing, thinking, and you know, there are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. I got up later and went to the window. Outside, the neighborhood followed its rhythm, but I was different. It was as if I had taken off a heavy coat that I had carried for years without realizing it. I walked through the rooms again. The silence was now mine. It wasn't loneliness. It was freedom. For the first time in decades, I could hear my own thoughts without anyone telling me I was getting in the way, or taking up space, or being a nuisance. I was the owner of my house, but more than that, I was the owner of my life. As the sun began to set, illuminating the room with that soft orange of a late Texan afternoon, I knew that something inside me had changed forever. But the peace of that night, it wouldn't last long, because the next day, someone knocked on my door, bringing news that would change everything again. And there I realized that the story was not over yet. It was just the beginning of the most unexpected part. When I opened that old drawer in my office, the same one that had not seen the light of day for years, I almost felt a smell of the past escape from inside. There were leaflets, maps, notes, saved dreams. Dreams that I myself pushed to the bottom of the drawer, always with the excuse that one day I would have time, one day I would have money, one day I would have peace. And there, in the middle of that pile of yellowed papers, I found a brochure that had been with me since I was in my 30s, Santa Fe, New Mexico. The cover photo showed the sunset hitting the adobe walls, that earthy tone that seems to hold old stories. I always wanted to visit that place, always, but life pulled me by the arms in other directions. Work, bills, worries, Margie's illness, Ethan growing up, the unexpected expenses. And I stayed. I stayed until I forgot that I also had desires. But that day, there, looking at that faded brochure, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, craving, desire to go, to see, to exist away from the ties that held me for so many years. And I'll tell you something, there is a moment in life when we realize that if we don't choose now, we may never choose again. I closed the brochure slowly, sat in the chair and stared out the window, thinking about the road, the landscapes that I only knew from photography. The silence of the house seemed to push me out, as if to say, "Go, Ronald, life is not over." And so it was that for the first time in a long time, I opened my laptop, not to pay bills, but to book a train ticket. I chose a very early time, one of those that make us wake up before the sun and feel that the day will be different. I bought the ticket with a slight trembling in my hands, not from fear, but from emotion. It was as if I was giving a piece of myself back to myself. I packed a small backpack. I took my old camera, my favorite, the one Margie gave me in our 25 years of marriage. I also took a notebook, which was almost blank, waiting for new stories. Before leaving, I closed the curtains of the house, but not sadly, but with a strange sense of beginning, like someone who saves a chapter to start another. I locked the door, stared at the facade for a few seconds, and felt a deep peace. I wasn't running away. I was going to see the world I've always waited for, going to find parts of myself that I've left stored for convenience or tiredness. I walked to the station with steady steps, enjoying every detail of the neighborhood, as if I were seeing it all for the first time. The train arrived with that beautiful, almost poetic, metallic noise. I sat by the window, and when the wagon began to move, my heart pounded. But this time it wasn't pain. It was life. And look, let me tell you this as if we were sitting side by side now. Sometimes the greatest freedom is the one we discover late, and that is precisely why it has so much value. The train headed toward New Mexico, cutting through Texas like a line drawing my new beginning. I observed the fields, the small towns, the horizons too long to fit in the gaze. And deep in my chest, something told me that the most remarkable moment of this story was yet to come. That all that, the abandonment, the courage, the silent house, was just the prelude to a larger encounter. And I was right, because when I arrived in Santa Fe, something happened that I could never have predicted. And that's what will change the course of this story once again. When I arrived in Santa Fe, I felt as if I had landed in another time. The adobe streets, the smell of roasted green pepper, the distant sound of a guitar in the square. Everything had a calm that seemed to talk to me. I walked through the artisan markets, took pictures of colorful doors, wrote loose thoughts in my notebook. It was as if every corner gave me back a piece of my soul that I had forgotten in the routine of the years. I slept well that first night, in a small hotel with a balcony facing the mountains. I woke up with the sun touching the headboard, and for the first time in a long time, without that feeling of heaviness on my shoulders. But on the third day of the trip, as I sipped coffee at the local coffee shop, a strong cup of coffee and buttered bread that looked homemade, I noticed that the people around me were looking at me in a strange way. It wasn't bothersome. It was recognition. A girl at the counter stared at me for a few seconds, put her hand to her mouth, and then came to me with shining eyes. Is it Ronald?" she asked. I nodded slowly, thinking that perhaps she had seen the local report from Dallas. But she took a deep breath and said something that made me freeze. "The whole country is talking about you." My coffee almost fell out of my hand. I opened my phone and saw dozens of notifications. Messages from unknown numbers, missed calls, and even emails. When I got into the news, there I was, on the screen of America's biggest TV shows. Big headline: "The elders who taught the country to value their parents." The report had been bought by a national broadcaster. Excerpts from my interview were at all times, morning, afternoon, and night. They showed the facade of my house, the testimony about the abandonment, and the decision to donate everything to a foundation. And, in the middle of the article, a narrator said, "This is Ronald, a man who chose his own dignity and ignited a debate about love, respect, and the way we treat those who brought us into the world." I continued reading. Social networks were boiling. Young people telling that they called their parents after months of silence. Others saying they regretted treating their grandparents badly. Messages from people who cried when they saw the interview. Fathers and mothers thanking me for having said what they never had the courage to say. The Senior Dignity Foundation published that, in less than 24 hours, it had received enough donations to renovate 3 shelters. Letters began to arrive at my email and the old address of the house in Dallas. Some came from states I had never visited: Montana, Maine, Oregon. One read, "Mr. Ronald, your courage saved my relationship with my father. Thank you." Another, written by a child, "I saw you on TV. I promise my mother that I will take care of her when she gets old." And then something inside me opened up in a way I didn't expect. I, a man who spent years being ignored inside his own home, was now heard by the whole country. But, there, sitting in the Santa Fe coffee shop, with my cell phone vibrating non-stop, I discovered a truth that gave me goosebumps. Recognition is not about fame. It's about impact. It's about leaving a good mark on the world. A mark that no one can erase. I closed my phone, took a deep breath, and looked out the window at that blue sky so different from Dallas. And I thought, who knew, Margie? Look where I ended up. And let me confess to you something that crossed me at that time. Sometimes justice comes from where we least expect it, and it arrives more beautiful than any revenge. I stood there for long minutes, absorbing all this, drinking my already cold coffee. But as I got used to this wave of recognition, a part of me knew that the story wasn't complete yet, because on the Dallas side, someone also saw this national report and the reaction of these people. Ah, my friend, this reaction is what will change everything again. Because when I got back to the hotel that afternoon, there was a message on my room door, a message that made my hands tremble. And that's what I need to tell you in the next part. It had been a few months since the trip to Santa Fe, and life, little by little, had found a more serene rhythm within me. I'd wake up early, make my strong coffee, write some in my notebook, and then walk around the neighborhood enjoying a kind of silence that didn't hurt, a silence that welcomed. The house was at peace, and so was I. But one afternoon, as I sat in a simple corner cafe in Arlington, reading a folded newspaper and enjoying the smell of ground beans, something happened that I would never have imagined months before. When I looked up by chance, I saw Ethan standing there hesitantly on the other side of the counter. He saw me at the same time, and what I saw on his face. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't anger, it wasn't the shadow of the man who used to cross my house as if it were his. It was tiredness, it was humanity. He was a son who had finally learned the weight of the world. He approached slowly, almost asking permission at every step. He wore simple clothes, a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, hands marked by someone who had worked all day. None of those marks of comfort that life by my side has always given him. "Dad, can I sit down?" he asked, and his voice came out low, without any hidden demands, without that tone of someone who already expected to receive more from me than he gave. I nodded, pushing the chair with my foot. He sat down, stared at the table for a few seconds, and took a deep breath as if the words were rocks he needed to pull out of his chest. I didn't come to ask for anything. I didn't come to argue. I just wanted to talk. And that caught me in a way I didn't expect. Because, for the first time in many years, my son was talking to me as a man, not as someone who assumes that I am his obligation, his automatic harbor, his emotional cane. He said he was living in a small rented apartment with 2 co-workers. He said that he and Melissa were no longer together. She didn't really like the idea of living simple, he said, trying to laugh, but with a sad look. He told me that he was working in a warehouse, carrying boxes, working overtime, learning to survive on his own. "Dad, I had never understood how difficult it is to live without support," he confessed. "I don't think I had ever seen you as a person. Like someone who was also tired," I heard. I just heard. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to soften it. I just stood there, cup in my hands, listening to the man my son was becoming. For the first time, he didn't ask me for money. He did not apologize emptily. He did not ask for a house. He only asked for my attention, and that, to me, was worth more than any promise he could have made before. At one point, he looked up and stared at me for real. "Dad, I know that I have smitten the Lord. I know I've crossed the line. And I don't want anything in return. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to be someone better." That moved me in an unexpected way. Because the world can applaud, the house can be renewed, life can be in order. But hearing a child acknowledge his or her own fault is different. It's profound. It's human. I didn't say I forgave. I didn't say I forgot. I didn't offer a house or money or a shortcut to an easy restart. I just put my hand on the table and said, "I hear you, Ethan. Sometimes this is the first brick of reconstruction." He smiled in a shy, almost childish way, as when he was 8 years old, and showed me a drawing waiting for approval. We had coffee together. 2 tired men, 2 men trying. No rush, no justification, no masks. I left that cafe knowing that we were no longer father and son trapped in disappointment, but 2 human beings walking slowly towards a new kind of respect. And inside me, a phrase was hammering as if warning that the end has not yet come. Sometimes, forgiveness does not come with a hug, come with understanding. But what I didn't imagine, after this meeting, something even bigger was about to happen. Something that would close the last circle of this story. That's it. That's what I need to tell you in the next part. When I left that cafe where I met Ethan again, I walked slowly home, feeling the warm Arlington wind hit my face as if to say that time really passes, and healing. It was not immediate, nor magical, nor perfect, but for some reason that I still didn't quite understand, I returned to my living room that night with a different feeling than the one that had accompanied me for months. I opened the curtains, Let the orange light of the sunset cross the carpet and illuminate the old furniture where my New Testament now stood. There, neatly folded, was the document I had thought so much about before signing. Half of what I built I left to the Senior Dignity Foundation, and the other half to a scholarship fund for young caregivers of the elderly. People who know in practice the dignity of reaching out to those who have carried the world for decades. As I reread each line, I realized that it wasn't just a piece of paper. That was my entire story rearranged, not driven by anger, but by justice. And in that instant, sitting at my weather-scratched wooden desk, I wrote one last letter, not to Ethan, not to Melissa, not to the world. I wrote to myself, "Today, I am no longer a forgotten man. I am a whole man, and being whole is worth more than any inheritance." When I was done, I folded the letter carefully and put it inside a simple envelope, as if I was holding a part of me that finally made sense. I closed the door to the house, walked to the porch, and stood there, listening to the crickets begin to sing and watching the Texas sky say goodbye slowly, tinged with gold, pink, and purple, the colors that have always reminded me that everything passes, but everything also begins again. And it's curious. Today I know that this story was not about loss nor about abandonment. It was about understanding, about learning that love cannot be begged, that respect cannot be demanded, and that sometimes life waits for us to collapse and then teach how to get up in a new way. The biggest lesson I take from all this is simple but profound. We only find peace when we stop chasing after those who don't see our value and start walking alongside those who really deserve to stay. And if you've stayed here with me until now, listening to every bit of my life like someone listening to an older friend in the evening, I want to thank you. Really. His company, even there on the other side of the screen, makes this story not just memory. It makes it a bridge. So, if this little piece of my story touched you, give me a like. It's like a silent hug that warms the channel and reminds me that I didn't tell you all this alone. And if you want to come back for more conversations like this, sign up. It's like leaving the door open for the next coffee that we're still going to have together. By the way, tell me here in the comments where you listen to me. I'm always curious to know from which part of this world the people who share this moment with me come from. And it also activates the bell. That way you don't miss out when the coffee is brewed again. Now, as the night wind begins to cool and I close another day of my life with a light heart, I leave you with a special invitation. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next real story that will appear here on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story. And come with me, because there is still a lot of life for us to talk about.